thank you everyone for joining us again. And a special thank you to Brenda, who has been at work all day and is going to introduce our guests for the evening. So thank you, Brenda.
Okay. Good evening. Welcome to Messy Music to Share. My name is Brenda LeBeau and I'm from Transcona Memorial United Church, where I am part of the Messy Church team. I'm also one of the conference organizers. It's my honor to introduce Ron Klusmeier to the conference. Ron has worked in music and arts as a full-time ministry since 1971 as a composer, editor, and arranger, and currently resides on Vancouver Island, BC. Ron has had many fantastic accomplishments as a musician, a writer, composer, and a worship leader throughout his life, heading up music and art programs at the United Church head office, as well as many churches, as well as providing a range of freelance religious broadcast services. Ron has been honored with an honorary degree from St. Andrew's College in Saskatoon. As a composer, Ron collaborates with many other authors and has hundreds of selections published worldwide. This includes Voices United, the hymn book of the United Church of Canada, which contains more hymn tune compositions by Ron than any other contributor. More Voices, which is a supplement to Voices United, includes yet more of Ron's hymn tunes. In addition, his compositions are featured in many denominational hymnals in Canada and the United States. Since 2012, Ron and his partner Christina have worked closely with Canadian Food Grains Bank. Ron currently serves as accompanist at Brechin United Church in Nanaimo. Welcome, Ron.
Well, thank you, Brenda. And thanks for such a wonderful introduction. My goodness. I want to do a few introductions and make a few comments myself before we actually start doing any of the music. And the first is, I just want to say thanks to Graham, who's kind of stick handling all of this. And I've done a lot of Zoom events, and really I'm just amazed at how smoothly he's making all of this happen. So thank you, Graham. And then I want to introduce Lonnie Model. Lonnie and her husband, David, are great friends of Christina and mine. And Lonnie and I have worked together doing music ministry for, well, in the neighborhood of 25 years. And currently we work together at Brechin United Church in Nanaimo. We're both living on Vancouver Island. And I think you can see Lonnie on your screens. And I just asked her if she could say a word or two about herself.
Thanks. I'm taking everybody can hear me okay? Okay, good. I unmuted myself correctly. Yay. As Ron said, yes, we have collaborated on things big and small for about 25 years now. I was sitting thinking about, when was that? And the number kind of scared me, but it's been wonderful.
Well, get in line.
I am a retired teacher, elementary teacher, taught in the classroom for many years and finished my career as a music specialist in the elementary school system here in Nanaimo Ladysmith on Vancouver Island. I've directed church choirs for bigger than 25 years, probably closer to 30 plus years, both in churches north and here on the island, and still sing in a couple of choirs and direct a couple of choirs. So I direct our Brechin United Church on Zoom and by personal recordings, and Ron and Christina do their magic by making us look and sound wonderful. And I also direct a community choir here on Vancouver Island, which Ron plays for, and again does his magic through Zoom and recording to make our concerts on video. So it's wonderful. So that's kind of me.
Great. Thanks, Lonnie. My main reason for wanting to be sure to introduce Lonnie to everyone is that we pre-recorded a half a dozen pieces because music over Zoom is at best a little sketchy and sometimes unpredictable. And so Lonnie did the singing of the pieces, and a little bit of the music her husband David sings along as well. We'll talk about that when we get to those items. I also want to introduce Walter Farquharson. Walter is probably one of, if not my very closest friends and kindred spirits and all of that. I don't write any words. I take other people's words and I set them to music. And Walter and I have had, boy, Lonnie, you talk about how long you and I have been working together. Walter and I are just about double that. We have been working together for about 50 years. We first met at the Prairie Christian Training Center in Fort Capel, Saskatchewan, at a music workshop when we were both, I think, about 8 or 9, something like that. We were both there to learn everything that we could, and we left that place new partners and partners for life, a friendship that has been very, very rich. So together we've written about 150 songs and hymns and so on. Walter is a retired United Church minister. He lives in Saltcoats, Saskatchewan. We communicate by phone and by email, and we continue to write to this day. Then I also want to mention where people can source the music if there's any of it that is of interest to them. We prepared a handout that you may have printed, and hopefully if you did print it, you'll have it in front of you. If you didn't print it, not to worry, because the words will appear on the screen as we use them. We started developing a very, very, I'm just going to call it a deep website in 2005, and have been building and refining it ever since then, using all of the wonderful variations that are available to us through the internet. So instead of just having one version of a song, we'll have 10, 15, 20, sometimes 25 versions, just recognizing that different congregations, different musicians, different music leaders, different singers, all have different needs for how music is delivered to them. And so we've tried to meet that. And we would just encourage you to look at the website. It's named on the handout. It's named in a number of other places. One of the very, very interesting things about the site, though, is its browse capability. We have grown and grown and grown it since 2005, so that we have thousands and thousands of links in terms of keywords. We have a section for seasons. We have a section for subject. We have a section for scripture references, any word or phrase, so that if you're looking for music for a particular event or time, you can use those references. And the music is available either by individual title, by individual version, or you can subscribe to the whole set. There are about, I think, a little over 300 songs at the moment. We keep adding all the time because my current library is about 800. We're going to use 6 of the songs from the website. I almost said this evening, and I'm not sure if that works everywhere. In fact, I'm quite sure it doesn't. So shortly, any minute, we're going to start using 6 of the songs from that, and we'll provide some introduction material. And want you to know in advance that at the end of our time, after we've done those 6 pieces, we're quite happy to have any kind of open Q&A that's helpful. The music that we're going to do today is music that was specifically designed, with the exception of one piece, specifically designed to be all ages music, all of the words written by Walter, And together, he and I made a very intentional effort to create music that, forgive me for this, but wouldn't be dumbed down. It would be friendly for children. It would not have any of theological compromises, because we feel strongly that the children are pretty smart. And one other part of the website is every song has a place where the author or the composer can make comments about the song. And I'm going to refer to some of those comments that Walter has made tonight. The printed music that you have, the downloads, were printed directly from the website. And so we're going to launch into some of them. The first song that we're going to use is Jesus, Teacher and Friend. So if you have that one handy and can bring it up, that would be great. So, this is very special to Walter and to me because it is the very first song that we ever wrote together. I think it was back in 1911 or 1912, something like that. But anyway, we wrote this together at that event in Fort Capel, Saskatchewan that I mentioned earlier. And Walter was very intentional when he wrote the words. He said that he sees children as doers, as learners, as people that we can learn from, as adventurers. And one of the things that you'll notice is a line in the second verse. It's just a 2-verse piece. The line reads, "All things broken, let us mend." And Walter points out that children have a particular ability to latch themselves to feel at one with people who are able to be healing people, whether that's fixing a toy, fixing a broken bicycle, or helping when things are rough. And so, Graham, let's go with Jesus, Teacher and Friend.
Jesus, teacher, brave and bold, let us serve you, young and old. Let us faith-filled workers be, all around your wisdom see. Let us play and dance and sing, your goodness find in everything. Jesus, friend so strong and true, show us good, brave work to do. Show us those who need a friend, all things broken, help us mend. Free our minds and stretch our care. Teach us to serve you everywhere.
Well, I mentioned that we have different versions available of all of this music. And the version that was sent out to you is the one that is for easy guitar. We tend to have a number of different guitar versions and piano versions and organ versions and so on. The easy guitar version is the one that allows people with basic guitar skills the ability to play along and provide some accompaniment. This next piece is, in terms of looking at it, the music that you have printed, maybe in front of you, it's a B-flat version. And what that means is that we have taken most of the songs on the website and created arrangements of the melodies for all of the instruments of the orchestra, so that, for instance, if we have a child who is taking music lessons or is in a band or orchestra program, they will be able to play along on almost all of these pieces. And that's, for non-musicians, that may not seem like a big deal, but musicians will understand that many of the orchestral instruments are transposing instruments. So that if I play a C on the piano, the clarinet, which is a transposing instrument, if it plays a C that it's fingering, the note that will come out is a B flat. Now, I'm not going to go into detail on all of that, but musicians will know what I'm talking about. And what that means is that sometimes can be an impediment to having children, young people, people of any age, really, take part in worship leadership. And so we decided to go that extra bit and provide all of the transpositions that any orchestral or band instrument would need. And that appears again with every title. Now, we're going to do a piece called Shout for God. And Shout for God is, well, I tend to call it an antiphonal piece. Other people might say it's a call and response piece, where one voice or one group sings a phrase and another voice or group sings it right back. And I have to tell you that the most satisfying way I have had to experience and use this piece myself is by having a group of children be the leadership group and a congregation be the response group. And it's quite a wonderful shift to have the children being the leaders. Often in call and response pieces, it'll be one adult calling and everybody else responding. But having the enthusiasm of those children's voices is quite wonderful. Now, I mentioned it's called Shout for God. I'm old enough to remember that when I was going to church when I was a child, and it was actually Walter that reminded me of this, when I was going to church as a child, one thing you could almost count on when you go into the church at that time was a parent would say, shh, shh. You were told to be quiet. And as Walter has said, if the shh didn't come out, the look did. So he thought it would be quite fun to begin this piece with Shout for God. And so we're going to invite you to listen and take part. In this one, Lonnie is going to be the leadership person, and David, her husband, is going to sing along with anybody else who wants to sing along, doing the calling part. Now, it's important to recognize as we go through these words that there are 4 verses. There are a number of different approaches to how this is handled. So Shout for God is obvious, needs to be emphatic, needs to be upbeat. But the second verse reminds us that we have quiet times with God as well. And so the second verse, instead of beginning with shout, it begins with hush. And you'll notice that the tone of the vocal changing to reflect that. Shout for God.
Shout for God.
Shout for God.
Make a happy sound.
Make a happy sound.
Clap for God.
Clap for God.
God is all around.
God is all around.
Hush for God.
Hush for God.
Let the quiet sing.
Let the quiet sing.
Wait for God.
Wait for God.
Deepest feelings bring.
Deepest feelings bring.
Sing for God.
Sing for God.
Sing a pleasant song.
Sing a pleasant song.
Work for God.
Work for God.
Good replaces wrong.
Good replaces wrong.
Praise our God.
Praise our God.
Care for all God's friends.
Care for all God's friends.
Love our God.
Love our God.
God's love never ends.
God's love never ends. God's love never ends.
One of the requests that Walter and I had early on in our work together was to try to come up with a song that could help teach children the meaning behind communion or the Lord's Supper or whatever name is applied to it. And that's pretty tricky stuff because there is so much symbolism and so much metaphor in the act of eating together. And so Walter chose to suggest that we can make it a learning experience by thinking about us gathering around a table at home. And we know that eating together, that sharing food together around table is a blessing in itself. It's a time in a family setting where often there don't have to be any pretenses. People can just let their hair down and be who they are. But it's also a time often of rich communication, because with busy lifestyles, people just don't have free time that allows them to check in with each other in the same way that they can if they're all seated together at a table. And Walter said that he believes there are 5 points that all have to do with how we do this business of eating together. And he makes those 5 points applicable both to that family table or extended family table and the table where we receive communion in our faith experience. The first one of those 5 is the act of gathering. And that's not to be taken lightly. Gathering brings us together. We can trust in God. We can trust in one another. And all of that trust is interdependent. All of that trust is acknowledged in that gathering together. And then number 2 is so obvious. Well, we eat. How's that? We eat upon food from the bounty of creation. And this is quoting directly from Walter's comments on the website about this song. Whether food is abundant or scarce, it will be shared. And those with greatest need, those most vulnerable will be the first, not the least, to share. Christina and I had that driven home to us, and we actually used this song in some work that we did in both East Africa, in Sierra Leone, Burkina Faso, in West Africa and Ethiopia. And we were working on behalf of the Canadian Food Grains Bank. And one of the things that struck us time after time, day after day, and we actually lived in a village and were guests of a small village where it was the iconic African village of grass huts and no infrastructure at all. And yet those were the people that were so incredibly generous. We were in the South Sahara, or just south of the Sahara, And we visited what the Food Grains Bank calls a growing project. And this is an area of Africa which had undergone tremendous suffering due to famine. 200,000 people had died the previous year. And this garden project was keeping them alive. We sang this song. We sang this about the sharing, and it caused us, I have to say, it caused us to wonder how it is that we compare this in this very unique situation to a lavishly decorated and covered communion table. It was just a very jarring experience, but a very humbling experience, because we were about 4 hours from our destination and where we were going to be spending a night. And at the end of our time with the folk in these village, they wanted to give us as a gift, as a symbolic thank you to the Food Grains Bank. And what did they give us? These people who had suffered so much in the previous 2 years, they gave us food. They gave us 3 baskets of root crops, peanuts, their food. And then they gave us a bag containing fresh eggs. And another man came behind them in this gift-giving moment with 4 chickens, 4 live chickens, 2 on each hand. And finally, bringing up the back were 2 more men who led a goat. And those of us who were there wondered, what are we going to do with this gift? And we realized the importance of accepting it. And it was hard to accept. It was so much easier to give. By the time we had finished having our supper with them and ready to head back for the night trip across the open grasslands, we found that all of those creatures and foods from the earth had been loaded into our truck. And so we took them back. And in honor of that gift, we had a feast the next day with our hosts. And for me, that's what the whole communion idea is about. And that's what this song is expressing. Because the last 3, 4, 5 of those points that I talked about Walter suggesting we do when we do this communion thing is, number 3 is we share our lives. And number 4 is we share the good news. And number 5, I think the most important, we go forth, which is a lovely, simple way of saying we go from that table to live the faith. You've seen those signs on the back of churches when people are on their way out, where it says, now the service begins. The bread we eat.
The bread we eat is Jesus' bread, and it is sweet and good. The bread we eat is Jesus' bread, so now we share our food. For Jesus came to open doors, to help set prisoners free. And when you've eaten Jesus' bread, it changes you and me. Now Jesus came to help the poor, to cure the sick and lame. And when you've eaten Jesus' bread, you're asked to do the same. For Jesus came to give friends life, to teach us each to give. And when we've eaten Jesus' bread, we know that's how to live. The bread we eat is Jesus' bread, and it is sweet and good. The bread we eat is Jesus' bread, so now we share our food. For Jesus came to show God's love, to name God's family. And when we've eaten Jesus' bread, our hearts begin to see.
Well, we're going to pick up the tempo a little bit. A song that was actually the title song of a collection that Walter and I put together. It's called Just Like Salt. And Jesus called us to be like salt of the earth. And it's scripturally, it's in the same neighboring passage as that part about us being light. And it's okay to picture ourselves as being salt of the earth, but if salt loses its saltiness, it doesn't work. So there's a wonderful line in the refrain. The refrain starts with a refrain, comes around a couple times. It says, Jesus says that we should be just like salt, and if our world forgets God, guess whose fault? Now, at the very end, there's an optional bit of movement which works for some people and doesn't work for others. And because it involves pointing, and often we're helping to have children understand that pointing isn't always a good thing to do. But at the very end, there's a little tag ending after we've sung that refrain, and it says, guess whose fault? And if you like, you can point at yourself. The words are, it's mine. Guess whose fault? It's yours, or in this case, and you're encouraged to point at someone else. Or guess whose fault? It's ours. And that's where we extend arms out, and we can connect with hands if we wish. Some people choose not to use that at all because of the implications that it has. But just know that it's there and it's possible. Jesus wanted his followers to live their faith openly and faithfully, just like salt.
Jesus said that we should be just like salt. And if our world forgets God, guess whose fault? Yes, Jesus said that we should be just like salt. And if our world forgets God, guess whose fault? Salt brings out the flavor of food we eat. Salt that has no saltiness is thrown on the street. Oh, Jesus said that we should be just like salt. And if our world forgets God, guess whose fault? Yes, Jesus said that we should be just like salt. And if our world forgets God, guess whose fault? Those who follow Jesus, who know God's care, are those who live creatively and aren't afraid to share. Oh, Jesus said that we should be just just like salt. And if our world forgets God, guess whose fault? Yes, Jesus said that we should be just like salt. And if our world forgets God, guess whose fault? Guess whose fault? Guess whose fault? It's mine. Guess whose fault? It's yours. Guess whose fault? It's ours.
I don't know. I felt a lot of fingers pointing back at me. Yikes. Jesus came, a child like me is the next piece. In many ways, it's a creed. And we have ways of putting words together for our faith experience that don't always stand the test of time. And so it's quite likely that there are terms that many of us might be familiar with that were part of our growing up in the faith experience that wouldn't translate well today. And in fact, many people might wonder what we're talking about. And that becomes one of the impediments to encouraging people to experience what we experience. Now, the church isn't the only place where that happens. It happens in industry. It happens in sports. In sports, they all have their own language. Musicians like me and many of my friends, we have our own language. And when we use that language with each other, we communicate beautifully. But to a person who is not a trained musician, they may not have a clue about what we're talking about. Or think of technology. Think about terms like PDF, GIF, or MP3. And think about how foreign those terms were just a couple of decades ago. And so we have to keep updating, and we have to keep living the life that we're taught through Scripture to live, but not become so narrow in the language we use or the way we articulate it that we isolate ourselves from others. This next piece is Jesus came, a child like me. You know, I just realized I made a mistake at the very beginning when I was talking about that first piece we sang, Jesus, Teacher and Friend. I indicated that it was an easy guitar version. Not a big deal, but I was wrong. It was an easy piano version. And that just twigged at me now as I was looking at what the next piece was when I saw that this is the easy guitar version. It also has easy piano and other piano levels, but just in case anybody was confused by that at the very beginning. So join us in Jesus Came, a Child Like Me, also sometimes referred to as Live Jesus in Us.
Jesus came, a child like me, so the face of God I'd see. God is not left far away. God is with us every day. Live Jesus, live Jesus with us, live Jesus in us, come live in us today. Jesus came to show us all ways to God's own care. Live Jesus near us, live Jesus with us, live Jesus in us, come live in us today. Jesus came God's work to do, came to live in me and you, came to turn the world around till God's peace and love are found. Live Jesus, near us, live Jesus with us, live Jesus in us, come live in us today. Jesus came to show God's face, live God's love and be God's grace. God lives now in me, in you. God's at work in what we do. Live Jesus near us, live Jesus with us, live Jesus in us, come live in us today.
For our last piece in this part of the collection, we're going to invite you to sing with us a song called Teach Me, God, to Wonder. Walter has suggested in his comments that wonder is kind of the opposite of taking for granted. There's wonder all around us that we experience in nature and in creation. Wonder can sometimes kind of spark the whole business of creativity. I want to tell you a quick little story that happened to Christina and me just a matter of weeks ago. We experienced wonder as if we were seeing for the first time. It was an incredible, incredible moment. Now, Nanaimo on Vancouver Island, where we live, is a place of wonder in itself. We live with beauty and recognizing that there are so many different kinds of beauty on this earth. But we very much love where we are, and we're thrilled to be close to ocean and close to mountains. In Nanaimo, there's a harbor, and it's a combination of pleasure craft, of working fishing boats, and a lot of seaplanes. There are a couple of seaplane docks right on the inside edge of the harbor. And so there's a lot of traffic, and there's a pier that goes out that's a favorite crabbing pier for all kinds of people, residents and non-residents alike. We decided, as we often do, to take a lunch down. And this was in lieu of having a larger evening meal, we just took a couple of sandwiches down and sat on, there are benches that are just feet from the water. And we sat taking in all of the activity on the water. And there was a lot, because in the summer, this was either end of August or beginning of September, there's a lot of activity on that water. And people, for the most part, are quite respectful of each other, even though it gets a bit crowded. We couldn't help but notice the sound was diminishing. And we could actually see in our minds where that diminished sound was moving from and to. And Christina looked off to her left and just grabbed my arm, because there, coming directly into the harbor, was an orca fin coming out of the water. That orca was going to traverse this incredibly full and busy harbor. And what was more astounding was when we looked carefully at that orca, there was a smaller fin next to it. And each time Mom came up, so did the babe. And mother and calf would go down and come up again for air. We wondered if she was teaching the calf how to work her way through that kind of waters. It seemed to be the only logical solution to a problem that whales often have in terms of their relations with humans. Well, this was very public. And you could see and you could hear the wonder. And that mom and calf made their way all the way through the harbor, going in between pleasure craft and fishing craft and even landing airplanes. We were moved to tears. And that whole harbor, that entire harbor, had become absolutely silent. Boats stopped in the water. It was a moment of grace, but boy, it was a moment of wonder. And wonder doesn't come in big packages like that. It can come in any size. Walter loves to tell the story of his oldest child, Scott, who was very inquisitive. And one day in the garden, he was learning about the tailings of earthworms and what earthworms do. He had his own word for those. He called them nerf works. And so at the end of Walter's commentary of this piece on the website, he says, "Let us be blessed with an abundance of nerf works. Teach me, God, to wonder," truly an all ages song.
Teach me, God, to wander. Teach me, God, to see. Let your world of beauty capture me. Grace to you be given. Love for you be lived. Life be celebrated, joy you give. Let me, God, be open. Let me joy you give. Let me, God, be ready. Let me be awake. In your world of loving my place take. Praise to you be given. Love for you be lived. Life be celebrated. Joy you give. Teach me, God, to know you, hear you when you speak, see you in my neighbor when we meet. Praise to you be given, love for you be lived, life be celebrated, joy you give.
Well, friends, and especially Carol and organizers, just want to thank you so much for this opportunity to spend this bit of time with you today. It's been pure joy. Blessings.